Marcus Thompson had always been trouble. At 28, he rode his Harley-Davidson through the streets of London like he owned them. The leather jacket, the heavy boots, the attitude, everything about him screamed danger. His friends called him Tank because of his massive build and the way he bulldozed through life without caring who got hurt. That sunny Tuesday morning started like any other. Marcus woke up in his cramped apartment above the auto repair shop where he worked part-time. The smell of motor oil and cigarettes filled the air. He grabbed his leather jacket, the one with patches from various motorcycle clubs, and headed downstairs to his bike. The Harley roared to life, its engine echoing through the narrow alley. Marcus had no real destination in mind. He just wanted to ride, to feel the wind against his face and the power of the machine beneath him. London traffic was its usual nightmare, but he weaved between cars with reckless abandon. Other drivers honked and cursed at him, but he didn't care. In fact, he enjoyed their anger. It made him feel powerful, important. As he rode through the wealthy neighborhood of Kensington, something caught his eye. A small, well-groomed dog was tied to a lamppost outside an expensive-looking cafe. The dog was a French bulldog, small and vulnerable, with a bright red collar that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. Its owner was nowhere to be seen, likely inside getting their morning coffee. An ugly thought crept into Marcus's mind. He had always hated rich people and everything they represented. Their fancy cars, their designer clothes, their pampered pets. This little dog represented everything he despised about the upper class. A cruel smile spread across his face as he pulled his bike to the curb. The dog looked up at him with trusting brown eyes, tail wagging slightly. It was clearly well loved and well cared for, probably never having experienced cruelty in its short life. Marcus felt a twisted satisfaction knowing he was about to change that. He pulled out his phone and switched on the video camera. His friends would love this. "Look at this spoiled little rat," he said to the camera, his voice full of contempt. "Bet this thing eats better food than most people. Time to teach it about the real world." With the camera still recording, Marcus swung his heavy boot toward the small dog. The impact wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, but it was enough to send the poor animal sprawling across the sidewalk, yelping in pain and confusion. The dog scrambled to get back on its feet, clearly terrified and hurt. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the expensive storefronts around him. "That's what you get for being born into luxury," he said to the camera. "Should have been born a street dog like the rest of us." The French bulldog cowered against the lamppost, shaking with fear. Its trusting nature was completely shattered. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. He had shown this symbol of wealth and privilege what real life was like. He had brought it down to his level, but as he was putting his phone away, preparing to leave, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A man had emerged from the cafe and was walking toward him with purposeful strides. Not just any man. Marcus recognized that face from dozens of action movies. The bald head, the intense stare, the perfectly fitted casual clothes. It was Jason Statham, one of Hollywood's biggest action stars. And the dog Marcus had just kicked belonged to him. Marcus tried to play it cool, but his hands were suddenly shaking as he fumbled with his phone. Statham wasn't running or shouting. He was walking with the calm, measured pace of someone who was absolutely certain of what they were going to do when they reached their destination. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes were fixed on Marcus with laser-like intensity. "That your bike?" Statham asked when he reached Marcus, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of danger. Marcus nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. Up close, Statham seemed even more intimidating than on screen. He wasn't particularly tall, but he radiated the kind of physical confidence that came from years of martial arts training and stunt work. "Nice machine," Statham continued, walking slowly around the Harley while keeping his eyes on Marcus. "Must have cost you quite a bit. Labor of love, I imagine." Marcus still couldn't find his voice. He watched as Statham bent down to check on his dog, gently running his hands over the animal to make sure nothing was broken. The dog whimpered and pressed against its owner, seeking comfort and protection. "He's all right," Statham said, standing back up. "Lucky for you. But I think we need to have a little conversation about respect and consequences." The way he said the word consequences made Marcus's skin crawl. This wasn't going to be a simple telling off. Statham had a reputation for doing his own stunts, for being genuinely tough both on and off screen, and Marcus had just heard something he clearly cared about deeply. "Look, man, I didn't know it was your dog," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice coming out higher than usual. It was just a prank, you know. Nothing serious. Statham's expression didn't change. A prank, he repeated slowly. You kicked a defenseless animal for a prank. Filmed it for your entertainment. Marcus realized with growing horror that Statham had seen everything. He had watched from inside the cafe as Marcus deliberately targeted his dog, had seen the cruelty and the laughter. There would be no talking his way out of this. Tell me, Statham said, his voice still deadly calm. What do you think would be an appropriate consequence for someone who hurts innocent creatures for fun? Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was face to face with one of the world's most famous action heroes, and he had just given the man every reason to hate him. The comfortable weight of his leather jacket and the rumble of his bike beneath him suddenly felt meaningless. All his swagger and attitude had evaporated in the face of real danger. Statham picked up his dog gently, cradling the still shaking animal against his chest. We're going to take a little ride, he said. You and me. Time you learned what real toughness looks like. Marcus found himself following Jason Statham's black Range Rover through the winding streets of London, his hands trembling on the handlebars of his Harley. He had no choice but to follow. Statham had made it clear that running away would only make things worse. The action star had taken a photo of Marcus's license plate and had his face on the video from his own security camera outside the cafe. They drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, eventually arriving at what appeared to be a private gym in an industrial part of the city. The building looked unassuming from the outside, but Marcus could hear the sounds of training coming from within, the thud of punching bags, the clang of weights, the sharp commands of instructors. Statham parked his car and got out, still carrying his French bulldog. The dog had stopped shaking but remained pressed close to its owner, clearly seeking comfort and protection. Statham whispered something to the animal before gently placing it in the car with the windows cracked for air. Get off the bike, Statham said simply. Marcus did as he was told, his legs feeling weak beneath him. He had always prided himself on being tough, on being the kind of guy other people were afraid of. But standing in this empty parking lot facing Jason Statham, he felt like a scared child. What's your name? Statham asked. Marcus, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus what? Marcus Thompson, Statham nodded slowly. Well, Marcus Thompson, you and I are going to have a little training session. See, I believe in giving people chances to prove themselves. You acted like a coward back there, picking on something smaller and weaker than you. Now you're going to have the opportunity to pick on something your own size. Marcus felt his stomach drop. I don't want to fight you, man. I already said I was sorry. No, Statham corrected him. You said you didn't know it was my dog. That's not an apology. An apology would involve understanding what you did wrong and showing genuine remorse. What you showed back there was fear of consequences, not regret for your actions. They walked toward the gym entrance. Marcus considered running, but he knew it would be pointless. Statham was in excellent shape, and besides, where could he go? The man had all his information now. Inside, the gym was exactly what Marcus had expected from the sounds. A serious training facility with professional equipment and several people working out. A few looked up when they entered, recognizing Statham and nodding respectfully. Marcus noticed that some of them had the build and scars of professional fighters. This is Marcus, Statham announced to a tall, muscular man who was apparently the gym's owner or main trainer. He needs to learn about respect and consequences. Think you can help with that? The trainer looked Marcus up and down with experienced eyes. What did he do? Kicked my dog for entertainment. Filmed it for his friends. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every person in the gym was now looking at Marcus with undisguised disgust. In this world of fighters and tough guys, there were still codes of honor, and hurting defenseless animals violated every single one of them. I see, the trainer said slowly. Well, we certainly can't have that, can we? Marcus wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't as bad as it sounded, but the words died in his throat. Looking around the gym at all these genuinely tough people, he realized how pathetic his earlier behavior had been. These were men and women who faced real challenges, who pushed themselves to their limits, who earned their strength and confidence. He had been picking on a small dog. Strip down to your t-shirt and shorts, the trainer commanded. We're going to see what you're really made of. With shaking hands, Marcus began removing his leather jacket. The jacket that had always made him feel powerful and intimidating now seemed like a costume, a fake shell he had been hiding behind. Underneath, he was just a slightly overweight man with more attitude than actual strength. Statham watched as Marcus reluctantly prepared for whatever was coming next. "You know, Marcus, I've met a lot of genuinely tough people in my line of work. Stunt coordinators, martial artists, military personnel. You know what they all have in common?" Marcus shook his head. "They protect things that are weaker than them. They use their strength to help, not to hurt. What you did back there, that's not toughness. That's the opposite of toughness. That's weakness disguised as strength." The trainer handed Marcus a pair of boxing gloves. "Put these on. We're going to start with some basic conditioning. See if we can build some real character along with some real strength." Marcus slipped on the gloves, his hands still trembling slightly. "What happens after this?" "That depends on you," Statham replied. "This can be the beginning of you becoming a better person, or it can just be the punishment you deserve for being cruel. Your choice." The next hour was the hardest physical experience of Marcus's life. The trainer put him through a series of exercises that exposed every weakness in his body and mind. Push-ups until his arms gave out, burpees until he was gasping for air, heavy bag work until his shoulders screamed in protest. Every time he wanted to quit, he looked over and saw Statham watching with those intense eyes and somehow found the strength to continue. But it wasn't just physical training. Between exercises, the trainer and some of the other gym members shared stories about their own dogs, their pets, the animals they had rescued and cared for. Marcus began to understand that what he had seen as a pampered luxury pet was actually a beloved family member to Statham. "That dog has been with me through some of the toughest times in my career," Statham said during one of Marcus's rest periods. "When I was injured doing stunts, when I was struggling with difficult roles, when I lost people I cared about. He's been loyal, loving, and faithful, and you hurt him because you were angry at the world and needed something to take it out on." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine shame. Not embarrassment at being caught, not fear of punishment, but actual remorse for his actions. He thought about how the dog had looked at him with trusting eyes, how it had wagged its tail before he hurt it. The animal had never done anything to him, had never even seen him before. As the training session continued, Marcus began to realize that this wasn't just about punishment. Statham and the others were trying to show him what real strength looked like, what genuine toughness meant. It wasn't about intimidating people or hurting defenseless creatures. It was about pushing yourself, protecting others, and taking responsibility for your actions. By the end of the hour, Marcus was exhausted, covered in sweat, and completely humbled. But for the first time in years, he also felt something like respect for himself. He had pushed through when he wanted to quit, had faced his fears, had endured genuine hardship. After the brutal training session, Marcus sat slumped against the gym wall, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Every muscle in his body ached and sweat poured down his face. He had never been pushed this hard in his life, and the experience had stripped away all his pretenses and false confidence. Statham approached with a bottle of water and a towel. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice no longer carrying the edge of anger it had before. Marcus accepted the water gratefully, his hands still shaking from exhaustion. "Like I've been hit by a truck," he admitted honestly. "Good. That's the first honest thing you've said today." Statham sat down beside him, which surprised Marcus. He had expected the actor to maintain his distance, to continue treating him as an enemy. "Why are you being nice to me?" Marcus asked. "I hurt your dog. I would want to kill someone who did that to my pet." Statham was quiet for a moment, watching the other gym members continue their training, because anger alone doesn't change anything. "I could have called the police had you arrested for animal cruelty. I could have let my friends here teach you a lesson the hard way, but what would that accomplish? You'd just be angry and resentful and probably take it out on something else defenseless when you got the chance." Marcus hadn't thought about it that way. He realized that Statham was right. If he had just been beaten up and arrested, he would have blamed everyone except himself. He would have seen himself as the victim. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus," Statham continued. "What made you into the kind of person who hurts innocent animals for entertainment?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had never really examined his own behavior before, never asked himself why he acted the way he did. "I don't know," he said finally. "I guess I've just always been angry. Angry at what? Marcus thought about it. Really thought about it for the first time. Everything. The world. People who have things I don't. People who seem happy when I'm not. He paused, struggling to find the words. I grew up poor. Really poor. My dad left when I was 5, and my mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed. I watched other kids get things I wanted, go places I couldn't afford to go, have opportunities I never had. Statham nodded, listening without judgment. So you decided the world owed you something? Yeah, I guess I did. And when I didn't get it, I got angry. The angrier I got, the more people stayed away from me. The more people stayed away from me, the angrier I got. It's been like that for years. And hurting my dog made you feel better about your own pain? Marcus felt his face burn with shame. For a minute, yeah. It made me feel powerful. Like I was getting back at all the people who had more than me. But it wasn't really about the dog, was it? It was about you. About what you represent. What do I represent to you? Success, fame, money. All the things I don't have and probably never will have. Marcus looked down at his hands, still wrapped in the boxing gloves. I saw your dog and I saw everything I hate about my own life. So I took it out on something that couldn't fight back. The honesty of his own words surprised Marcus. He had never admitted these things to himself, let alone to a stranger. But somehow the physical and emotional exhaustion had stripped away his usual defenses. Statham was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You know, I wasn't always successful. I was a competitive diver for years, trained for the Olympics. Never made it. I worked as a street performer, sold jewelry on the street, did construction work. I know what it's like to struggle, to feel like the world is passing you by. Marcus looked up, surprised. Really? Really. The difference is, when I was struggling, I tried to channel that energy into something positive. I kept training, kept trying to improve myself, kept looking for opportunities. You channeled yours into anger and resentment, but you made it. You became famous and successful. I'm still nobody. Success isn't just about fame and money, Marcus. It's about becoming the kind of person you can respect. It's about using whatever strength you have to make things better, not worse. The trainer approached them holding a leash. At the end of the leash was Statham's French bulldog, looking much calmer than before but still cautious around Marcus. Thought you might want to check on him, the trainer said to Statham. Statham took the leash and knelt down to examine his dog carefully. The animal seemed fine physically, but it kept glancing nervously at Marcus. He's scared of me now, Marcus said quietly. I ruined his trust. Yes, you did, Statham agreed. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Marcus looked at the small dog, remembering how it had looked at him with trusting eyes before he heard it. The memory made him feel sick. I don't know. How do you fix something like that? Time, patience, consistent good behavior. You can't undo what you did, but you can prove that you're different now. Why would you even give me that chance? Most people would just write me off as a lost cause. Statham stood up, still holding his dog. Because I believe people can change if they really want to. But it has to come from inside. No one can force you to be a better person. You have to choose it. Marcus struggled to his feet, his legs still weak from the workout. What if I don't know how? What if I've been angry for so long that I don't know how to be anything else? Then you learn. The same way you'd learn any other skill. You practice. You fail sometimes. You get back up and try again. The trainer handed Marcus his leather jacket. It felt different now, heavier somehow. The patches and studs that had once made him feel tough now seemed childish and fake. There's a group that meets here twice a week, the trainer said. Men who are working on becoming better versions of themselves. Some are recovering addicts. Some have anger issues. Some just want to be better fathers and husbands. It's not therapy exactly. More like a brotherhood of guys who are trying to do right. Marcus held his jacket, unsure whether to put it back on. Would they accept someone like me? Someone who hurt an innocent animal? Probably not at first, the trainer said honestly. But someone who's genuinely trying to change? Someone who's willing to do the work? Yeah, they'd give you a chance. Statham was watching Marcus carefully. The choice is yours. You can put that jacket back on, go back to your old life and pretend this never happened, or you can leave it behind and start becoming someone different. Marcus looked around the gym at all the people working hard to improve themselves. He thought about his cramped apartment, his dead-end job, the friends who only laughed at his cruelty. He thought about the dog's trusting eyes and how he had destroyed that trust for no reason except his own pain. If I stay, if I try to change, what happens to the video? The one I took of me kicking your dog? Statham's expression hardened slightly. That video gets deleted, right now in front of me, and you never ever do anything like that again. With shaking hands, Marcus pulled out his phone. The video was still there, ready to be shared with his friends who would have found it hilarious. Instead, he deleted it permanently, watching as the evidence of his cruelty disappeared forever. "It's gone," he said quietly. "Good. Now, are you ready to start becoming the man you should have been all along?" 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself back at the gym, but this time he had come voluntarily. The first few days after his encounter with Statham had been the darkest of his life. He had gone home to his apartment and really looked at himself for the first time in years. What he saw disgusted him. The walls were covered with posters of motorcycles and tough guys, but no pictures of family or friends. His fridge was empty except for beer and takeout containers. His clothes were dirty, his apartment was a mess, and he realized he hadn't had a genuine conversation with another human being in months. He was 28 years old and completely alone in the world. The men's group met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Marcus had spent 3 days working up the courage to show up, and even then he had almost turned around twice in the parking lot. But something Statham had said kept echoing in his mind. You have to choose to be better. The group was led by a former military man named David, who had lost his leg in Afghanistan and struggled with anger and alcohol when he returned home. There were 12 men in total, ranging in age from early 20s to late 50s. Some looked like they could be fighters. Others looked like ordinary office workers. What they all had in common was a desire to be better than they had been. "We have a new member tonight," David announced, when Marcus nervously took a seat in the circle of chairs. "Marcus, would you like to tell us why you're here?" Marcus felt all eyes on him and wanted to run. But he thought about Statham's dog, about the trust he had destroyed, about the years of anger that had brought him to this point. "I hurt something innocent because I was angry at the world," he said simply, "and I want to stop being that kind of person." The men nodded, and Marcus was surprised to see understanding rather than judgment in their faces. Over the next hour, he listened as other men shared their own stories. A father who had screamed at his children because of stress from work. A husband who had pushed his wife away with his constant negativity. A young man who had gotten into fights because he couldn't control his temper. "The thing about anger," David said, "is that it's usually just pain wearing a disguise. When we're hurt, disappointed, or afraid, sometimes it's easier to be angry than to admit we're vulnerable." After the meeting, a man named Tony approached Marcus. Tony was about 40 with calloused hands and kind eyes. "First meeting?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Is it always this intense?" Tony laughed. "Actually, that was pretty tame. Wait until we get into the really deep stuff. But don't worry, it gets easier. What's your story, if you don't mind me asking?" Marcus found himself telling Tony about the incident with Statham's dog, about his anger and resentment, about the wake-up call that had brought him here. Tony listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. "You met Jason Statham?" Tony asked when Marcus finished. "That's wild. But you know what's really wild? That he cared enough to give you a chance instead of just having you arrested." "I keep thinking about that," Marcus admitted. "He could have destroyed my life with one phone call. Instead, he tried to help me change it. That tells you something about the kind of man he is. And the fact that you're here tells me something about the kind of man you could become." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into changing his life with the same intensity he had once channeled into anger. He started coming to the gym every day, not just for the group meetings but for regular workouts. The physical training helped burn off the negative energy that had been building up inside him for years. But the real work was mental and emotional. David taught the group techniques for managing anger, for recognizing the triggers that led to destructive behavior, for channeling their energy into positive directions. Marcus learned that his anger wasn't really about other people having more than him. It was about his fear that he would never be worthy of good things. "You've been telling yourself the same story for years," David explained during one session. "The story that you're a victim, that the world is unfair, that you deserve to be angry. But stories can be rewritten." Marcus started seeing a therapist individually as well. Dr. Sarah Chen was a small, soft-spoken woman who somehow managed to get Marcus to open up about things he had never talked about with anyone. His abandonment by his father, his mother's exhaustion and depression, the poverty and instability of his childhood, the way he had learned to use anger as armor to protect himself from being hurt. Anger served a purpose when you were young. Dr. Chen explained. It protected you from feeling abandoned and helpless, but now it's preventing you from connecting with people and building the life you actually want. The breakthrough came during his 6th week at the gym. Marcus was working the heavy bag when he noticed a commotion near the entrance. A woman had brought in a small boy, maybe 8 years old, who was clearly upset about something. The boy was crying and pulling away from his mother, who looked embarrassed and frustrated. Marcus's first instinct was the same as always: irritation at the disruption, judgment of the mother for not controlling her child. But then he stopped and really looked at the situation. The boy wasn't being bratty or spoiled. He was genuinely scared. His mother wasn't being neglectful or weak. She was trying to help her son face his fears. Without thinking, Marcus approached them. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. The mother looked up, clearly wary of the large, intimidating-looking man approaching her child. "He's supposed to start boxing lessons today, but he's having second thoughts. I think we might need to come back another time." Marcus knelt down to the boy's eye level, remembering how Statham had done the same with his dog. "What's your name, buddy?" "Tyler," the boy whispered. "I'm Marcus." "You know what, Tyler? I was scared my first day here, too. Want to know a secret?" Tyler nodded, his tears slowing. Everyone here was scared their first day, even the toughest guys. But you know what we learned? Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do something good even when you are scared. Tyler looked up at his mother, then back at Marcus. "Will you help me learn?" Marcus felt something break open in his chest, something that had been frozen for years. "I'd be honored to help you, Tyler, but first, let me introduce you to some friends of mine who will teach you better than I ever could." As he led Tyler and his mother over to meet David and some of the other men, Marcus realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. Instead of being annoyed by someone else's need, he had wanted to help. Instead of judging a scared child, he had felt protective and caring. That evening, he called the number Statham had given him weeks ago. "Marcus?" Statham's voice sounded surprised but pleased. "How are you doing?" "Better, a lot better. I wanted to thank you, and to ask if maybe I could see your dog again. I know he's probably still afraid of me, but I thought maybe over time I could show him that I'm different now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You know what, Marcus? I think that can be arranged. But first, tell me about these changes you've been making." 3 months after the incident, Marcus sat in the same cafe where his life had changed forever. But this time he wasn't alone. Across from him sat Jason Statham, and between them on the floor lay the French bulldog, contentedly chewing on a toy. The transformation in Marcus was remarkable. He had lost 20 pounds through his training at the gym, but more importantly, he carried himself differently. Gone was the aggressive swagger, the need to take up space and intimidate others. In its place was a quiet confidence, the self-assurance that came from genuine self-improvement rather than false bravado. "He's not afraid of you anymore," Statham observed, watching as his dog occasionally glanced up at Marcus without the fear that had been there before. Marcus smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. It took time, a lot of patience. The first few visits, he wouldn't even stay in the same room as me, but I kept coming by, bringing treats, sitting quietly, letting him get used to me being around without being a threat. "Sounds like the same approach you've been taking with yourself." Marcus laughed, and the sound was lighter than it had been in years. "Dr. Chen says I'm basically reparenting myself, learning to treat myself with the same kindness I would show a scared dog or a frightened child." Over the past 3 months, Marcus's entire life had been rebuilt from the ground up. He had quit his part-time job at the auto repair shop and found full-time work at a veterinary clinic. It didn't pay as much as he would have liked, but it gave him a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. Every day he helped care for animals that were sick, injured, or afraid. The work was often difficult and sometimes heartbreaking, but it felt meaningful in a way his previous jobs never had. "Dr. Martinez, the vet I work for says I have a natural way with the difficult cases," Marcus said. "The animals that are aggressive or scared because they've been hurt. I guess I recognize something of myself in them." Statham nodded. "Trauma recognizes trauma, but so does healing." Marcus had also started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends. The first time he walked into the shelter, surrounded by cages full of abandoned and abused animals, he had broken down crying. All the pain he had caused, all the hurt he had inflicted came flooding back. But instead of turning away from that pain, he had learned to channel it into action. "There's this pit bull mix at the shelter," Marcus continued. "Big guy, maybe 80 pounds. He was used in dogfighting, and when they rescued him, he was so aggressive they were going to put him down. But I started working with him, just sitting with him, talking to him, showing him that not all humans are cruel. Last week, he let me pet him for the first time." "What's his name?" "Tank," Marcus said with a self-deprecating smile. "Ironic, right? That used to be my nickname too. But this Tank is learning to trust again. Learning that his strength doesn't have to be used for violence. We're both learning that, I guess." Statham reached down to scratch his dog behind the ears. "You know, when I first saw what you did that day, I was ready to make sure you paid for it in a way you'd never forget. But my friend David at the gym convinced me to try a different approach." "David talked to you about me?" "Several times. He told me about your progress, about how hard you were working to change. He also told me about your background, about the things that had shaped you into the angry person you were." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but now he recognized it as shame rather than anger. "I'm not trying to make excuses for what I did. There is no excuse for hurting an innocent animal. No, there isn't. But there are explanations, and understanding those explanations helps prevent it from happening again." Marcus had learned this distinction in therapy. He couldn't excuse his past behavior, but he could understand the pain and fear that had driven it. His father's abandonment had left him feeling worthless and unwanted. His mother's struggles had taught him that the world was a harsh place, where only the strong survived. His poverty had made him resentful of those who had more, and his isolation had turned that resentment into cruelty. "The hardest part," Marcus said, "was forgiving myself. Dr. Chen kept telling me that I couldn't move forward while I was still carrying all that self-hatred." "But how do you forgive yourself for hurting something innocent?" "The same way you earn forgiveness from others," Statham replied. "Through consistent actions that prove you've changed. You can't undo what you did, but you can make sure it never happens again, and you can dedicate your life to making amends." Marcus looked down at the French bulldog who was now lying across his feet. The simple act of trust from the small animal meant more to him than any trophy or achievement ever could. "I think about that moment every day, not to punish myself, but to remind myself never to let that darkness take control again. And the anger. Is it still there?" Marcus considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But it's different now. Before it was like a fire that burned everything around it. Now when I feel it starting, I can recognize it for what it really is. Usually hurt or fear dressed up as rage, and I have tools to deal with it." He had learned breathing techniques, meditation, and physical exercises to manage his anger. More importantly, he had learned to identify his triggers and remove himself from situations before he could react destructively. The men's group had taught him that walking away wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. "There's something I need to tell you," Statham said, his expression becoming more serious. "The cafe has security cameras. I have the entire incident on video." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had been so focused on changing his life that he had almost forgotten the original incident could still have consequences. "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I figured you probably did. What are you going to do with it?" "That depends." "What do you think I should do with it?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. 3 months ago, I would have begged you to delete it, or tried to bargain with you, or gotten angry and defensive. But now, I think whatever you decide is what I deserve. If you want to press charges or show it to people as an example of how not to behave, I understand. I can't take back what I did, and I can't control the consequences." Statham studied Marcus for a long moment. You know, the old Marcus would have tried to manipulate this situation somehow. The new Marcus is willing to accept responsibility regardless of the cost. The new Marcus knows that real strength comes from facing consequences, not avoiding them. Well, the new Marcus will be pleased to know that I've decided to delete the video, not because I think you've suffered enough, but because I believe you've genuinely changed, and because the world has enough negativity in it already. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. "Thank you. That means more to me than you'll ever know. Don't thank me yet. I'm deleting it on one condition." Marcus braced himself. "What condition?" "I want you to share your story. Not the video, but your transformation. I know some people who work with at-risk youth, with men who struggle with anger and violence. They could use someone like you, someone who's been where they are and found a way out. The thought of sharing his story publicly terrified Marcus, but he recognized the fear for what it was, not a reason to run, but a reason to act despite being scared. I'd be honored to do that, he said. If it could help even one person avoid making the mistakes I made, it would be worth it. Statham reached across the table and shook Marcus's hand. You know, Marcus, I've played a lot of tough guys in movies, but sitting here with you today, seeing the real courage it took to change your entire life, I'm reminded that the toughest person in this cafe isn't the action hero. It's the man who chose to become better than he was. As they prepared to leave, Marcus knelt down to say goodbye to the French bulldog. The dog looked up at him with the same trusting eyes he had seen that first day, but now there was no fear, only acceptance and perhaps even affection. Thank you, little guy, Marcus whispered. You saved my life by showing me who I really was, and who I could become. Walking out of the cafe, Marcus reflected on how different this moment felt from 3 months ago. Then he had been running away from consequences, angry at the world, blaming everyone but himself for his problems. Now he was walking toward a future full of purpose and possibility, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. His Harley was still parked outside, but he rarely rode it anymore. The need to roar through the streets, demanding attention and intimidating others, had faded along with his anger. These days he preferred to walk or take public transportation. It gave him more time to notice the world around him, to see the people and animals he had been too angry to notice before. As Statham drove away with his dog, Marcus pulled out his phone and called David at the gym. Marcus, how did it go with Jason? Better than I could have hoped. David, I want to start speaking to groups, sharing my story. Do you think people would want to hear it? Are you kidding? Marcus, transformation stories like yours are exactly what people need to hear. When can you start? 1 year later, Marcus stood in front of a room full of teenagers at a community center in East London. These weren't ordinary kids. They were young people who had been in trouble with the law, who struggled with anger and violence, who felt forgotten by society. In many ways, they were exactly like he had been at their age, just without the motorcycle. How many of you have ever hurt something or someone because you were angry? Marcus asked. Almost every hand in the room went up slowly, reluctantly. Marcus nodded, understanding the shame they felt. I want to tell you about the worst thing I ever did, he began, and about how it became the best thing that ever happened to me. Over the past year, Marcus had become a sought-after speaker at schools, community centers, and rehabilitation programs. His story of transformation resonated with people who had given up hope that change was possible. But it wasn't just his words that made an impact. It was the genuine humility and compassion he brought to every interaction. The teenager in the front row, a girl with purple hair and defiant eyes, raised her hand. So you're telling us that some famous guy basically saved your life? What about those of us who don't have rich celebrities to help us out? Marcus smiled. He had heard this question many times before. That's exactly the wrong lesson to take from my story, Sarah. He had learned all their names before the presentation began. It was something David had taught him. People need to feel seen and valued as individuals, not just as members of a group. Jason Statham didn't save me. He just gave me the opportunity to save myself. And you know what? Every single day, life gives you that same opportunity. Every moment you choose not to lash out. Every time you walk away from a fight you could start. Every decision to help instead of hurt. Those are the moments when you save yourself. A boy in the back called out, "But what if you've already done things? Bad things? What if people already think you're trash?" Marcus felt a familiar pang in his chest. "Let me ask you something, Marcus," he said, realizing he had used his own name. The coincidence wasn't lost on him. "What's your real name?" "Marcus," the boy replied, surprised. "Well, Marcus, my name is Marcus too. And 2 years ago, people would have been right to think I was trash. I was angry, bitter, cruel to anyone weaker than me. I hurt an innocent animal for no reason except that I was in pain and didn't know how to deal with it." He told them the full story, holding nothing back. The poverty of his childhood, the abandonment by his father, the years of built-up resentment, the moment he kicked Statham's dog, the confrontation that followed, and the long, difficult process of rebuilding his life from scratch. The point isn't that I was rescued by a celebrity, Marcus concluded. The point is that I was ready to be rescued by anyone who was willing to show me a different way to live. Your rescue might come from a teacher, a counselor, a friend, or just from looking in the mirror one day and deciding you want to be different. After the presentation, several of the teenagers approached him with questions, but it was young Marcus who stayed until everyone else had left. I don't know if I can change, the boy said quietly. I've been angry for so long I don't remember what it feels like not to be angry. Marcus knelt down so they were at eye level, just as he had learned to do with Tyler at the gym, just as Statham had done with his dog. Can I tell you a secret? The boy nodded. I still get angry sometimes. The difference is now I know what to do with that anger. I use it to fuel positive change instead of destruction. I channel it into helping animals at the shelter, or working with kids like you, or pushing myself harder at the gym. But what if I mess up? What if I try to change and then do something stupid again? Then you start over. Change isn't a straight line, Marcus. It's more like climbing a mountain. Sometimes you slip backward, but if you keep climbing, you eventually reach the top. Marcus gave the boy his card. I want you to call me if you ever need someone to talk to. Day or night, because I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning in your own anger. As Marcus drove home that evening, he reflected on how much his life had changed. He now lived in a small but clean apartment near the veterinary clinic where he worked. The walls were decorated with photos of animals he had helped rescue and rehabilitate, pictures from his speaking engagements, and a framed certificate from his anger management program. His Harley sat in the garage, still functional but rarely used. He had kept it as a reminder of who he used to be, but also as proof that you could keep the parts of your past that had value while discarding the parts that caused harm. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he had added 6 months earlier. Jason Statham. They had stayed in touch not as celebrity and fan, but as two men who understood that real strength came from helping others rather than hurting them. How did the talk go today? Statham's text arrived before Marcus could even start typing. Really well. I think we reached some of them. There was a kid there also named Marcus who reminded me a lot of myself at that age. Are you going to work with him? If he wants help, yes. The same way you worked with me. You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about making a documentary about second chances, about how people can change. Would you be interested in being part of it? Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. A year ago, the idea of being in a movie, even a documentary, would have appealed to his ego and his desire for attention. Now he thought about it differently. Only if it could help other people change their lives too, he replied. That's exactly why I want to make it. You in? I'm in. That night Marcus visited the animal shelter for his regular volunteer shift. Tank, the pit bull he had been working with, came bounding over to greet him. The transformation in the dog was as remarkable as Marcus's own transformation had been. Where there had once been fear and aggression, there was now playfulness and affection. Someone came to look at Tank today, said Maria, the shelter director. A family with kids. They want to adopt him. Marcus felt a mixture of joy and sadness. He had grown attached to Tank, but he knew the dog deserved a loving home, not just weekend visits to a shelter. That's wonderful. He's ready for it. As he said goodbye to Tank that night, Marcus whispered, You taught me something important, buddy. You showed me that it doesn't matter how you start. What matters is how you choose to finish. Walking home under the London streetlights, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. It had started with one of the worst decisions of his life, but that decision had led to all the best ones that followed. His phone buzzed with a text from young Marcus, the teenager from the community center. I've been thinking about what you said. I want to try to change. Can you help me? Marcus smiled and quickly typed back, absolutely. The first step is deciding you want to be better than you are today. It sounds like you've already taken it. As he reached his apartment building, Marcus paused to look up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. 2 years ago, he had been a man consumed by anger and resentment, hurting innocent creatures for entertainment. Tonight he was someone who dedicated his life to healing and helping others find their way out of darkness. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the old anger had threatened to resurface. But every day he made the choice to be better than he had been the day before. And every day that choice became a little easier. Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, already thinking about tomorrow. He had a full day ahead of him, work at the veterinary clinic, a session with Dr. Chen, the men's group at the gym, and a phone call with young Marcus to help him take his first steps toward change. It was a good life. Not the life he had once imagined for himself, but something better, a life with meaning, purpose, and the knowledge that every day he was making the world a little bit better than he had found it, and it had all started with a small French bulldog and a man who chose to see potential, for good even in someone who had done something terrible. Sometimes, Marcus realized, the best thing that can happen to you is meeting someone who refuses to let you stay the person you used to be.